Daniel chapter 3 this morning. Very familiar, I'm sure, with many of you. Even if you didn't grow up going to church, you're probably familiar with this story about Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. We know their names as being Mishael, Hananiah, and Azariah, but their names were changed by Nebuchadnezzar. Remember, he's trying to change their identity. He's trying to literally re-educate them, indoctrinate them, if you will, of this Babylonian philosophy and religion, this occultic practices. He's teaching them this language, and they've learned the languages. They've been educated in the Babylonian ways, so to speak, yet they've not compromised their belief in the one true God. So I don't know about you, but this was one of my favorite stories growing up. And when I say story, this was a true story. It is a true story. It's not like some fairy tale, but I remember hearing about this when I was growing up in a Southern Baptist church in Sunday school, and they had the flannel board. Anybody know what a flannel board is, right? I mean, or felt board or whatever you call it. But I still remember, I always loved when our teacher would break out the flannel board, and I thought about doing it this morning, thought, nah, probably won't do that. But if you don't know what that is, go YouTube it. You've missed it. I really feel sorry for you, because the flannel board was where it was at. Basically, we'd take some Bible people, right, people of the scriptures, and would tell a story, and it would stick to this board. And I remember my teacher in Sunday school told the story about Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and I was mesmerized by it. I mean, it was awesome. It was great. And so maybe you remember something like that. If not, you certainly know what the story is all about. And I think there's a lot we can learn from this morning. There's some observations I believe that we can take from this text. Because I think it speaks to us today as well as it did to them back then. In Daniel chapter 3, we're going to begin reading verse 1. We're going to go through the whole chapter, so just bear with me. You can follow along in the scriptures. We always say this, that if you don't have a Bible, there's one under the chair that you are seated in. And if you don't have a Bible at all, please feel free to take that with you. It's our gift to you. But we love opening the scriptures because we want to hear what God has to say, not what I have to say or any other person for that matter. We want to hear straight from God's Word, okay? We don't want a neat little TED Talk or cheerleading session. We want to hear what God's Word has to say. We're going to be encouraged by His words as we read it. So Daniel chapter 3, beginning of verse 1, here's what Daniel writes. King Nebuchadnezzar made an image of gold whose height was 60 cubits and its breadth 6 cubits, so about 90 feet tall and 9 feet wide. He set it up on the plain of Dura in the province of Babylon. Then King Nebuchadnezzar sent to gather the satraps, the prefects, the governors, the counselors, the treasurers, the justices, the magistrates, and all the officials of the provinces to come to the dedication of the image that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. Then the satraps, the prefects, the governors, the counselors, the treasurers, the justices, the magistrates, and all the officials of the provinces gathered for the dedication of the image that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up, and they stood before the image that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. And the herald proclaimed aloud, "You are commanded, O peoples, nations, and languages, that when you hear the sound of the horn, the pipe, the lyre, the trigon, the harp, the bagpipe, and every kind of music, you're to fall down and worship the golden image that King Nebuchadnezzar has set up. And whoever does not fall down and worship shall immediately be cast into a burning fiery furnace." Therefore, as soon as all the peoples heard the sound of the horn, the pipe, the lyre, the trigon, the harp, the bagpipe, and every kind of music, all the peoples, nations, and languages fell down and worshipped the golden image that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. Therefore, at that time, certain Chaldeans came forward and maliciously accused the Jews. They declared to King Nebuchadnezzar, "O king, live forever. You, O king, have made a decree that every man who hears the sound of the horn, the pipe, the lyre, the trigon, the harp, the bagpipe, and every kind of music shall fall down and worship the golden image. And whoever does not fall down and worship shall be cast into a burning fiery furnace. There are certain Jews whom you've appointed over the affairs of the province of Babylon, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. These men, O king, pay no attention to you, and they do not serve your gods or worship the golden image that you've set up." Do you get the feeling these guys are like tattletales? Like, I mean, these are the guys who love to tell on other people. Verse 13. Then Nebuchadnezzar, in furious rage, commanded that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego be brought. So they brought these men before the king. Nebuchadnezzar answered and said to them, "Is it true, O Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that you do not serve my gods or worship the golden image that I've set up? Now, if you're ready, when you hear the sound of the horn, the pipe, the lyre, the trigon, the harp, the bagpipe, and every kind of music, to fall down and worship the image that I've made, well and good. But if you do not worship, you shall immediately be cast into a burning fiery furnace. And who is the God who will deliver you out of my hands?" Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego answered and said to the king, "O Nebuchadnezzar, we have no need to answer you in this matter. If this be so, our God whom we serve is able to deliver us from the burning fiery furnace, and he will deliver us out of your hand, O king. But if not, be it known to you, O king, that we will not serve your gods or worship the golden image that you've set up." Then Nebuchadnezzar was filled with fury, and the expression of his face was changed against Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And he ordered the furnace heated 7 times more than it usually was heated. And he ordered some of the mighty men of his army to bind Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and to cast them into the burning fiery furnace. Then these men were bound in their cloaks and their tunics, their hats, and other garments, and they were thrown into the burning fiery furnace. And because the king's order was so urgent and the furnace overheated, the flame of the fire killed those men who took up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And these 3 men, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, fell bound into the burning fiery furnace. Then King Nebuchadnezzar was astonished and rose up in haste, and he declared to his counselors, "Did we not cast 3 men bound into the fire?" And they answered and said to the king, "That's true, O king." He answered and said, "But I see 4 men unbound, walking in the midst of the fire, and they are not hurt, and the appearance of the 4th is like a son of the gods." Then Nebuchadnezzar came near to the door of the burning fiery furnace, and he declared, "Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, servants of the Most High God, come out and come here." Then Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego came out from the fire. And the satraps, the prefects, the governors, and the king's counselors gathered together and saw that the fire had not had any power over the bodies of those men. The hair of their heads was not singed, their cloaks were not harmed, and no smell of fire had come upon them. Nebuchadnezzar answered and said, "Blessed be the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who has sent his angel and delivered his servants who trusted in him, and who set aside the king's commands and yielded up their bodies rather than serve and worship any god except their own God. Therefore I make a decree. Any people, nation, or language that speaks anything against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego shall be torn limb from limb, and their houses laid in ruins. For there is no other God who is able to rescue in this way." Then the king promoted Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the province of Babylon. So we go back to verse 1. It says that Nebuchadnezzar had set up this image of gold. It sounds somewhat similar to what we see in Daniel chapter 2 when Nebuchadnezzar had this dream. You may remember this. And it literally struck fear in him to the point that he could not go back to sleep. It woke him up. He couldn't go back to sleep. The actual Hebrew language says that his heart was pounding like a hammer against an anvil. Like he was scared. He was terrified. It brought a lot of terror to him. And so he asked for all of his magicians, all of his sorcerers, all of those who practice the occult, the cultic practices, all these people to come in to tell the king, not just interpret it, but to tell the king, here's what you actually dreamed, and here's what this dream means. He was terrified. He wanted to know what was going on. None of them can do it. But Daniel asked for permission to take some time to be able to think on this, and he said, we're going to pray about this, and then to approach the king. And so that's exactly what Daniel did. He asked his friends, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, to pray with him, to ask God to give them real clarity as to what it was that Nebuchadnezzar had dreamed, and then what the interpretation was. The interpretation was that there was this image, and you may remember that the head was made of gold. So it's very similar to what the dream was. And so it could be that this influenced Nebuchadnezzar to actually construct not just an image that had a head of gold, but construct an image that was pure gold, right? And so Nebuchadnezzar does this. Now, more than likely, some years have passed between chapter 2 and chapter 3, more than likely. Some time has passed there. We don't know how much time, but we know more than likely some time has passed. So Nebuchadnezzar decides to build this statue. It's 90 feet tall, it's 9 feet wide, and it says that it's on the plain of Dura, which means that no one's really sure about where Dura would be, but they would say it would be outside the city of Babylon itself, in a plain, in an area where it could be very clearly seen, the statue. Like, I mean, if you think about Burning Man, if you know what that is, that they construct this really tall image that they set on fire out in the desert. I'm not sure what desert it is or where it is, but all these people come from all over, literally all over the world. And it really is a pagan festival is what it is. But they put it in this area that's flat that people could see it from like a long distance away. Probably very similar to what's going on here. This image is set up, people can see it. Imagine a 90-foot tall statue. You're in a very flat, plain area. You can see this. And that was the point. Nebuchadnezzar wanted to establish this and say that this was a god. Now, some have argued that this was a statue of Nebuchadnezzar. Some people say it could have been an image of Marduk or some other god that they worship, Baal perhaps. I tend to think it was probably Nebuchadnezzar because he had an ego issue. Like he was very narcissistic. Like we see this throughout the letter, or this book of Daniel. And so it very well could have been Nebuchadnezzar, and he wanted everybody to bow down and worship him. Because remember, in those days, even not just in the days of Assyria and Babylon and Greece and Rome, those who led those empires, kings or emperors, view themselves as God. And they wanted other people to view them as God. You may remember that in Rome, the Caesars were considered to be God. And if you worshiped anything or anyone other than the Caesar, you were considered atheists. That's what Christians were known as in early Rome. They were known as atheists because they did not worship Caesar. They worshiped the one true God. So they were considered atheists. Kind of interesting how language can change, right? So that being said, in this, Nebuchadnezzar is saying, I want everybody to bow down to this idol, to this image that I've set up. He wouldn't call it an idol, but to this image and worship him as God and worship the gods of Babylon. Well, we know the story, and so we're going to kind of make some observations here, probably 3 or 4 observations about them, and what are some practical takeaways for us? Because there's some practical things we can take away from what we learn in the Scriptures. So in verses 4 through 6, we see this courageous thing that's going on here. Verse 4 through 6 is, and the herald proclaimed, you're commanded, O peoples, nations, and languages, that when you hear the sound of the horn, the pipe, the lyre, the trigon, the harp, the bagpipe, all this music, I'm sure it's the same instruments you love to listen to today on your Spotify playlist. But you're to fall down and worship the golden image that King Nebuchadnezzar set up, and whoever does not fall down and worship will immediately be cast into this burning fiery furnace. Now, it's interesting, this language here, because it says, oh peoples, oh, the peoples and nations that were there, and languages. You would think, well, these are people of Babylon. Remember, Israel had been taken captive there. Okay, and not everybody was educated in the Babylonian literature or languages. It was just the elite, right? And Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah were part of that, as was Daniel. So not all the Jews or the Israelis or Israelites that were there were educated in this way, but they were there. Also, you have to understand that Babylon had taken a lot of captives from a lot of other nations and places. Remember, they conquered Assyria. So there were those who they had taken captive from Assyria. So when it says peoples, nations, and languages, it wasn't just the people of Babylon. It was all who were taken captive by Babylon, as well as the Babylonians that were there. So they're establishing this, and Nebuchadnezzar says, I want everyone, every single person to bow down. Now, there's been a question raised about this, like, where was Daniel in all of this? Like, where was Daniel? Because we don't see this here, and we don't see Daniel like stepping up and stepping in for Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, saying, hey, you're not going to do that to my friends, that kind of thing, right? Because they seemed like they were really tight. Well, more than likely, Daniel wasn't here. He was probably in the city of Babylon, mainly because he was, in effect, almost like the second in command of Babylon. Remember what happened in chapter 2, at the end of chapter 2? Scripture tells us, maybe if you want to just kind of look back up, listen to what this says here in verse 49, chapter 2. Daniel made a request to the king. Oh, wait, let me go back up. Verse 48. The king gave Daniel high honors and many great gifts and made him ruler over the whole province of Babylon. Over the whole province. Like Daniel has been elevated almost as though he's second in command. And he goes on and says that you've been able to be, he was accelerated, he was elevated in this sense, given high honors, and chief prefect over all the wise men of Babylon. So now not only was he was a wise man of Babylon, so to speak, but now he's like over all the wise men of Babylon. Why? Because Daniel was able to interpret, or to know what the dream was and interpret the dream. So Nebuchadnezzar has elevated Daniel in this. So there's a couple things that some scholars would say. Either Daniel was there in Babylon, not in the plain of Dura when this took place, and because Daniel had already expressed, at least in Nebuchadnezzar's mind, his loyalty to the king because he was able to know what the dream was and interpret it. So Daniel more than likely wasn't there. We don't, because we think he would have. I mean, he's already shown his loyalty to his friends, right? I mean, he's already been, like, they've stood together through this already. So I don't think that Daniel would have stood back and said, I'm not going to help my buddies out here.
Right.
So he goes on and says that these guys, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, are there along with other peoples who were taken captive in Babylon, and they were to fall down and worship this image. So let me give you the first observation here. That Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, all right, these names that they were given, they were courageous in their commitment to not dishonor God by worshiping the king's idol. Like they expressed this courage, like, we're not going to dishonor God by worshiping the king's idol.
Yeah.
Because to do so would have said that we acknowledge that there is another God that we will give our adoration to, as opposed to the one true God. And it took a lot of courage to do that. We're going to see it in a moment. But here's some things I think we can understand from this, so I think we need to understand our own life, is that you have to choose every single day who or what you will worship. Like, it is a daily decision. I love what Louis Giglio said. He wrote this in his book, The Air I Breathe, Worship as a Way of Life. Here's what he said. Worship is our response to what we value most. So how do you know where and what you worship? It's easy. You simply follow the trail of your time, your affection, your energy, your money, and your allegiance, like your devotion. And at the end of that trial, you'll find a throne, or end of that trail, rather, you'll find a throne. And whatever or whomever is on that throne is what's of highest value to you. And I think he said it really well, right? Because every day you and I, we face this pressure, like in this world that we live in your workplace, in your home life, among your friends, that every day you and I, we face a pressure to bow down to false gods and to conform to their image rather than the image of Christ. Like every single day. Like idols abound in our culture. Right? I mean, you hold them in your hand, you put them in your pocket, right? I mean, that very much is an idol to some people.
Yeah.
Right? Money, we could talk about that. Career, family, personal relationships, even religious activities. Like, there are things, my wife and I were talking about this just yesterday, how there are some people, I believe, and it's very easy to do, they're so driven by their feelings and their emotions that they will pretty much worship anything that makes them feel really good about themselves or stirs emotions that they really need stirred. That's why even in some churches, I believe people worship the worship music. They worship what stirs their feelings. Worship music is great. Worship is great when it steers our adoration to God, but not the performance and not the preferences that we want to have met. There was a song written by Ross King years ago, and I think Jimmy Needham had rewritten this, and it's called Clear the Stage.
Oh, yeah.
And I would encourage you, if you've not heard that song, I would encourage you to go and listen to it. But the premise of the song is clear the stage, get rid of the instruments, get rid of the lights, get rid of all this stuff, and have everything stripped away until all you can do is have an authentic worship time with God. Like, strip it all away. Because one of his lines says, you can sing all you want to, but worship is more than a song. So good. So I encourage you to go and listen to that. It's called Clear the Stage by either Ross King or I think Jimmy Needham has redone the song. But the reality is that we're faced by a lot of different idols. It's not just one gigantic idol that is set up like in a field somewhere around us. I mean, these idols oftentimes aren't tangible necessarily, right? Again, money, career, family, religious activities, relationships, or people. Like, for some of us, what we worship is the idea that we like to be worshiped. Like, we want it to be about us, like whether it be friends on Facebook or followers on Instagram or TikTok or whatever it may be, like that becomes an idol for us because of how it makes us feel about ourselves, because maybe you're insecure and you need this security and thinking that all these things provide security, and the reality is it doesn't. but yeah, you idolize it because you're giving your time to it, your affection to it, your energy to it, even your money to it, and your allegiance to this. It could be possessions. A lot of it can be possessions. The car you drive, the house you live in, the clothes you wear, whatever it may be. Like the things you possess, like you just can't do without these things. And I'm not talking about what are necessities, but oftentimes what are wants and desires. But even things that are necessary can become idols. Think about family and kids. Kids are great. I love my kids. Love my grandkids. But if we're not careful, they can become idols. That all of our love and affection is given to them at the expense of loving God and honoring Him. And I see this all the time. And I'm going to go ahead and say this, that we live in a culture today where like sports is king. I mean, you look at professional athletes and professional sports and how much money is given to all this, and people can say, well, here's the justification for that. But the reality is, there's so much given to these things. Not just that, but attention. I'm thinking about little kids that are in now baseball and football and basketball and volleyball and softball and all these different sports. And now you have travel teams. And I know families that are gone all the time at the expense of having their kids be part of a fellowship of believers. Like that are there. And they spend money on hotels and fuel and all these things. And I'm not saying sports are bad. I played sports growing up. Travel teams weren't a big thing when I was a kid, so there wasn't that competition. But now it's like there are families gone all the time to the point that has become what they're pursuing for their kids. And sometimes it's because they're living out their dreams through the lives of their kids. Some would say, no, I'm just doing it for my kids. But the question becomes, what are you teaching your kids in this? Like, this is more important than being around the people of God and learning about the things of God, following after God. Now, I know that that's not a popular sentiment in our culture, but the reality is we establish a lot of things that are idols. And back to what Louis Giglio said, and I completely agree with it, that when you follow the trail of your time, your affection, your energy, your money, and your allegiance, at the end of that trail, you're going to find a throne. And whatever or whomever is on that throne is what is of highest value to you. So what is of highest value to you? In this instance here, it can be said of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego that the one who was of highest value to them, even above their own lives, was God. Right? So idols take different forms and shapes, we know this, and there are so many voices and so many things that are vying for our attention and our affections, right, in this world, every single day. So that's why I said every day you wake up, you will choose who or what you're going to worship. I think one way to be able to determine that is asking the question, like, God, is this an idol in my life? Like, are you willing to ask that question honestly, and are you willing to listen to God's honest answer on that? Yeah, this is an idol to you. And you've got to choose. Are you willing to lay it down and let God destroy that idol in your life? Or are you going to continue to worship it? Are you going to give your affection, your devotion, your attention, your time, your money, your energy to this thing? Things aren't bad. But anything we love more than God is an idol, right? So in this situation, Nebuchadnezzar set this up. And they're like, we're not going to worship this idol. And it took a lot of courage because they said, we're not going to dishonor God. We're not dishonoring the one true God to worship a false God because it's convenient or it's safe. We're not going to do it, or because everybody else is doing it. So what I really believe, though, regarding our belief in God is that a deep belief in God is what catalyzes and it galvanizes our commitment, which fuels the courage we need when we're challenged and we're tempted to compromise. Like having a deep belief in God. Like, what is it that keeps you from drifting in compromise and temptation is like, I really believe that God is who He says He is and that God will do what He says He will do. Like, I believe that. And the reality is, I don't know that people have settled in their heart and their mind if they really believe God is who He says He is. Like, commitment doesn't follow courage, right? It's not like, hey, I'm going to be courageous, and because I'm courageous, I'm going to be committed. It's the opposite. That courage follows a deep and abiding commitment to Christ. Like when I say I'm committed to Him, then I'm going to do whatever I have to, and I'm asking God to give me the courage to stand up for what I truly am committed to. Like I'm committed to family. I'm committed to my wife. I'm committed to my kids, my grandkids. I'm committed to this calling that God's placed on my life. And because of that, there's going to have to be some courageous things that happen as a result of that. But my courage doesn't come before my commitment. I'm committed, and then God gives me the courage I need when compromise or temptation happens. Like commitment and conviction drive how we respond when our commitment to God is challenged and tempted to compromise. Right? Your convictions and your commitment. So for these 3 teenage boys, and that's what they were, the one true God was of highest value to them. And because of that, even in the midst of this culture, the thing I love about this is that they were still able to worship God in a land that was foreign to them. I love what Psalm 137 says, which Psalm 137, by the way, we don't know who that was attributed to. Some say it may have been Jeremiah. But we do know that this Psalm, Psalm 137, was written more than likely during the Babylonian period, the time of exile. Because if you were to go back, and I'm going to look at this real quickly. You might want to write it down in your notes if you're taking notes, Psalm 137. But just listen, there's one line in this verse, this psalm that I really love. But listen to what it says, and you're going to get the sense that, yeah, this was written during the time of the Babylonian exile. Psalm 137. By the waters of Babylon, there we sat down and we wept. Well, that makes sense. I mean, because they're in exile. I mean, they're weeping because they're not in Judah anymore. They're not in the land of Israel anymore. There we sat down and we wept, and we remembered Zion. On the willows there we hung up our lyres, and for there our captors required of us songs, and our tormentors mirth, saying, sing to us one of the songs of Zion. Almost like it's mockery. But listen to what it says in verse 4. How shall we sing the Lord's song in a foreign land? If I forget you, O Jerusalem, let my right hand forget its skill. Let my tongue stick to the roof of my mouth. If I don't remember you, if I do not set Jerusalem above my highest joy. Remember, O Lord, against the Edomites in the day of Jerusalem, how they said, let us lay it bare down to its foundations. O daughter of Babylon, doomed to be destroyed. Blessed shall he be who repays you with what you've done to us. Blessed shall he be who takes your little ones and dashes them against the rocks. Now, I know you're thinking, man, that sounds really cruel. We have to understand the imagery of this and the fact that these were enemies against God. I mean, these were those who sacrificed children to their false gods. I mean, these were those who were evil and wicked. But here's what I want to point out to you. This question in verse 4. How shall we sing the Lord's song in a foreign land? And here's what I will tell you to be true. That because of Jesus, regardless of what foreign land you're in, because of Christ, we're able to sing His song in a foreign land. Like in the hardest circumstances, if you know Jesus and you set Him as your highest joy, your highest value, you're able to sing His song in a foreign land. That's what I think Daniel and what Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego specifically, but also Daniel, was able to do in Babylon, to sing His song in a foreign land. Why? Because God was their highest value, that they valued Him above all things. That's the first observation. Here's the second one. And we see this in verses 7 through 12. So back in Daniel, it goes on and says, and I've read some of this already, obviously. Therefore, as soon as all the peoples heard the sound of the horn, the pipe, the lyre, the trigon, the harp, bagpipe, and every type of music, all the peoples, nations, and languages fell down and worshipped the golden image that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. Therefore, at the time, certain Chaldeans came forward and maliciously accused the Jews. It's like they took a lot of joy in accusing them. We want to tell you something, King, that you really want to know about. And so they told about Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and how they did not bow down. Now, some people ask the question, two things, because they were given leadership as well. Back in chapter 2, you may remember that Daniel made a request of the king, and he appointed Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego over the affairs of the province of Babylon, but Daniel remained at the king's court, which that makes you again think that Daniel may have been in Babylon at the time of this specifically. But with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they were given some position of authority in the kingdom, but not like Daniel. And so some have said that it could be that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego just didn't show up for the event. They just chose not to show up. Others say that they showed up and they just kept standing up. They wouldn't bow down. I happen to think that that's what the case was because, again, it says all the people, all the nations, all those who were there that they listed, the satraps, the prefects, the governors, right, the magistrates, all of those who were there in the lower levels of the government, if you will, Babylon, they were there. So I think they were there at that time. I just think it was really obvious when everybody else was bowing down, they were standing up. I mean, 3 guys in the midst of all of these people in this plane. It's going to stand out, right? We're not going to bow down to your idol. It made a difference. And so let me give you the second observation, that they were courageous in the midst of a compromising and a hostile culture. Like, think about compromising. You have a lot of Jewish people there, a lot of Israelites that were there. And so rather than worshiping the one true God, because they didn't want the fallout that would come from a hostile people, the Babylonians, they bowed down. Because what was it that Nebuchadnezzar said he would do? That they would be severely punished. For Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, he threatened them with the fiery furnace. Which, by the way, in that culture was not uncommon. Like in the Akkadian language, in the history of this, you see that that was not an uncommon practice for them to throw people in fire. So, for Daniel and for Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego specifically, they were courageous in the midst of a compromising and hostile culture. And guys, listen, that's the culture we live in today, right? I mean, we live in this Babylonian system. We live in a Babylonian culture that's full of compromise and it's full of hostility towards those who believe. Like compromise, we see it happen within those who profess to be Christians. Within the church, we're seeing a lot of compromise, not standing on the truth of God's Word, taking all of God's Word and the whole counsel of God's Word as being the Word to stand on, but compromising these things. And we saw this really begin to kind of unfold in a huge way, like the curtain being pulled back in 2020. Like the church was exposed. And you saw a lot of churches start changing how they did things and changing their beliefs on certain things and started compromising and going with culture rather than standing on the truth of God's Word, right? We hear this word woke all the time, but there were a lot of churches that went woke. A lot of pastors that were leading their churches in this way. A lot of compromise. And we're still seeing this happen. And I think we'll continue to see this until the day of the Lord, until we see actually the consummation of the kingdom in the end. Sadly. But the reality is, for us, the question becomes, are we going to remain courageous when everything and everyone around us is compromising and in the midst of hostility? Like, I mean, think about Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. What if they would have said, hey, look, guys, let's just like bow down real quickly and maybe no one will really notice because everybody else will be bowing down and we can just ask God for forgiveness. I mean, what if we just did that? It kind of reminds me of like, what if I just took that one hit? I mean, it's just one, right? What if I just took that one drink? I mean, it's just one. What if I just take that one look at porn? It's just one look. What if I go to that one party? It's just one party. What if I cross this one line? It's just one line. Or you can fill in the blank, whatever it may be. What if I just did this once? And that is exactly how the evil one, how Satan, our enemy, convinces us that just one will be the only one. But just know that it's a slow fade to destruction. It just is. Hey, Greg, I left that big knife back there. Can you bring that to me? There's a story that some of you don't know who Paul Harvey is. I saw your eyes get big when I said that about the knife. You're going to understand in a second. Thank you. So, some of you don't know who Paul Harvey is. If you don't, you missed an icon. Like, he was just an incredible storyteller. And I would encourage you to go back and just YouTube some of his stuff. But he tells this story about how an Eskimo would kill a wolf. I don't know if you've seen it or not, or heard this or not, but so he tells this story about how an Eskimo would kill a wolf, because obviously a wolf was the predator that would take their food that they would have for their family. So what they would do is they would take a large knife and they would cover the blade of the knife with blood. Oh, wow. And they would freeze it, and then they would cover it with another layer of blood. And they would freeze that layer, and then another layer of blood, freeze it, another layer of blood, freeze it, another layer of blood, and then they would bury it in the snow, blade up. Wow. And a wolf's sense of blood is very keen. You can smell it a long distance away. But they would bury it in the snow, And what would happen is the wolf would smell the blood and would start licking the blood on the blade of the knife. And it would get to the layer of ice underneath it. It would lick through the layer of ice, then lick the blood, layer of ice, lick the blood, and by the time it got down to the blade, where the blood was on the blade, the tongue of the wolf was numb. And they didn't realize they were licking the sharp blade, and it would cut their tongue to the point that the wolf would bleed to death. Wow. Now, I know that sounds really vicious, but that's exactly what the enemy does. He coats a lot of things with what you have a taste for, a desire for, and what you realize later, or maybe realize too late, is that you're on your way to a slow fade to destruction. That's exactly what the enemy does. Yeah. Like, oh, just take this one, or just look at this one, or just do this one thing, or whatever it may be. Just bow down once, and what you don't realize is that one thing, because of our fleshly desires, this desire for self-gratification that exists in us as humans, can lead us to that next, and leads us to the next. And before we realize it, the hook is in us, and we can't get off. And we end up finding ourselves licking the blade of the knife, if you will. That's how the enemy destroys us. He's very subtle in what he does. And so we have to be really careful with this. Here's a practical takeaway from this observation. Like, don't compromise, because to compromise is to lick the blade of the knife, if you will. Right? Here's the takeaway. When you choose to live a courageously resolute and uncompromising life, you're going to face opposition. You're going to face hostility. Like, the enemy's going to come after you because he didn't like you anyway, because if you're a follower of Jesus, you're a child of God, he's coming after you. Like, I can tell you as a parent that if you want to get to my heart, just attack my kids or my grandkids. Right? I mean, some of you heard the expression like mama bear, right? Mama bear comes out, you attack one of the mama bear's cubs, you don't want to be around a cub in the forest or in the woods, right? If you see a baby cub, you think, oh my gosh, it's nice and cuddly, it's cute. You just need to know mama bear is not far behind, and she will have an attitude with you. Because if she thinks you're trying to hurt one of her cubs, she will come after you with such ferocity. I mean, she will be ferocious with you. And the same thing is often true for parents. We love our kids, and we're going to protect our kids, right? And so the point being is that we're facing this opposition, right? And the enemy will come after you, because as a child of God, he knows that to get to the heart of God, he comes after the children of God. He's coming after you. That's just what it is. And so he wants you to compromise. He wants you to lick the blade. He wants you to fold up like a lawn chair in the midst of persecution. He's coming after you. You're going to face opposition. If you say, God, I want to live a resolute life like with Daniel. I want to be resolved not to defile myself with the king's food or the king's wine. Another way of saying this, I don't want to defile myself with all the food that is set on the table of the world. Right? All the delicacies, all the Turkish delight. I don't want to defile myself with this. When you're resolved to live life that way and say, I'm making a commitment, God, to follow you, not that you're going to live a sinless life, but to say, the pattern of my life is to follow after you, God. And if I do sin, when I do sin, I'm going to ask you to quickly forgive me. I'm going to quickly repent of this, because I don't want this. I don't want this to keep me from having an intimate relationship with you. Intimate fellowship. When you choose to live a courageously resolute and uncompromising life, you're going to face opposition, right? Because living counterculturally rather than caving to culture comes with a cost. It just does. Like, it's going to cost you. Like following the one true God. And what I mean by that is like the Jesus of the Scriptures, not the woke Jesus of culture. Because there are a lot of people who are redefining or trying to redefine Jesus based upon their cultural preferences. Right? Ripping out the Scriptures or whatever it may be. So just know that when we worship the Jesus of the Scriptures, that is countercultural in Babylon. That's like saying, I'm not bowing down to the idols that you've set up. I'm not bowing down to the false gods that you've set up. I'm just not going to do that. Right? The other thing I would say with this is that to live counterculturally, what it means is knowing which hills to die on. Because remember what I mentioned a couple weeks ago? That not everything we encounter in this world is a nail that needs to be treated with a hammer. Right? Because remember when Daniel heard that they had to drink from the king's wine and eat from his table, rather than Daniel saying, we're not doing it. We're going to rebel against this. He asked the chief eunuch, hey, would you test us? I mean, we want to eat vegetables rather than eating from the king's table and drinking his wine. We would love to just eat vegetables. Will you test us for 10 days? And if we're not better shape and better condition than everybody else, then okay, but would you just test us? Daniel didn't go in demanding. He was gentle, yet he was bold. Yeah. Okay? And so for us as believers, we're called to be rebels, but not reckless. Don't forget that. And so for this situation with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they didn't go in there with flags like, we're anti-Nebuchadnezzar or whatever. I mean, it wasn't like they're going in guns ablaze, and they just said, we're just not bowing down to the idol. We're just not going to do it. So you look at Daniel and Shadrach and Meshach and Abednego, they studied the literature and the languages of Babylon, not because they were caving to culture, but so they might become change agents in the culture that they were in. Right? There's a difference. And you have to ask God for discernment in that. Because you don't want to be engaged in sin to say, well, I'm just going to try to see what culture's doing. So in order to know what culture's doing, I need to kind of experiment with this stuff to know what culture's doing. That's not wise. And that's not what Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were doing. So asking God for discernment in this. But I will tell you that having this type of courageous faith that we see with these guys here in the Scriptures, that's what God uses to change the culture in which you live. And we're going to see that at the end of this chapter. Like God used them to help change some things. Now, did Nebuchadnezzar really confess? No, he basically said, just don't denigrate the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. He didn't say, stop worshiping all the false gods and worship the one true God. He just said, don't mess with them. Let them worship their God. But the reality is, they made a difference in people's lives. There's no doubt about it. So, observation. That you have to realize that when you're courageous, you're being courageous in the midst of a hostile and compromising culture. That's what they did. And we have to, every single day, make the choice who and what we're going to worship, and know that if we're going to live a life resolved to follow Jesus and not compromise, you're going to face opposition. You are. At school, at work, among your friends, some even among your family. You're going to face opposition. So just know that. Here's the third observation. And we get this out of verses 13 through 18. Nebuchadnezzar, in furious rage, commanded that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego be brought. So they brought these men before the king. And Nebuchadnezzar answered and said to them, is it true, guys, that you do not serve my gods or worship the golden image that I've set up? Now if you're ready, when you hear the sound of the horn, the pipe, all these instruments, to fall down and worship the image that I've made, well and good. But if you do not worship, you shall immediately be cast into a burning fiery furnace. And who is the God who will deliver you out of my hands? And so Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego answered and said to the king, O Nebuchadnezzar, we have no need to answer you in this matter. If this be so, our God, whom we serve, is able to deliver us from the burning fiery furnace. And he will deliver us out of your hand, O king. But if not, be it known to you, O king, that we're not going to serve your gods or worship the golden image that you've set up. So here's observation number 3. That these guys were courageous in the face of the king's threats. Like the king's threats did not faze them. Because they realized it wasn't the king who held their life in his hands. They were entrusting themselves to the one true God. And they knew then, they knew that God could rescue them if he wanted to. Like he could just say the word and it'd be done. Which we're going to see in a moment that he absolutely protected them. But they said, but even if he chooses not to, or even if, just know that we're not going to worship you. We're just not. I mean, Nebuchadnezzar asked this question, what God is there who will save you from what I will do to you? Yeah. And here's what you need to know, that our enemy, the evil one, he whispers that same question in our ear all the time. Who can save you from this? Who can save you from yourself? Who can save you from this situation and circumstance you're in? Who can save you from this? Nobody can do this. You might as well go out on your own. No one can save you. You might as well capitulate. You might as well just give in. Who can save you from this? And here's what the response was. They're like, we have no need to pray about this. We don't need to talk about this. We don't need to call a meeting. We don't need to take a poll on Instagram or TikTok or Facebook. Like, we will not serve your gods. And we're not going to worship your image. End of discussion. It's almost like they said, do your best to do your worst to us. Do your worst to us. We're not caving on this because we love our God more than we want to be safe. I wrote this down in my journal about what is we cave to false gods when the one true God is not all satisfying to us. Like we run to other gods and we bow down to them when the one true God is not all satisfying to us. Like when I'm fully satisfied with God, I don't need anything else. I don't need anyone else. And I will tell you this, that when you spend time with God consistently, and I would say daily, like you realize that He's all that you will ever need. All we need is found in all Christ is. And when we spend time with Him, we begin to see that. It's when you're not spending time with Him that you don't realize that. You think there's a deficit or there's a deficiency there. But how will you ever know if you don't spend time with Him? Like, everything you need is found in all Christ is, and He's given to us in Jesus. But that's when we run to other gods, when we do not find ourselves fully and all satisfied in the one true God. So here's the practical takeaway, because they did not cave in to the king's threats. They were courageous. That when you believe God is who He says He is, you're able to live courageously regardless of the enemy's threats. Like when I believe that God is sovereign over all things, that He's in control, that He is the one who holds my life in His hands. When I realize that, then I have nothing to fear. I don't have to worry about the enemy's threats. You do that, you keep standing firm in your convictions, and you will lose that promotion. That's okay, because you're not my provider. God is. Right? Or you're in that relationship, and the boy or girl that you're dating or you're in a relationship with, they say, if you don't do this, then it's over. Okay. Yeah. Have fun playing, Switch, PlayStation by yourself. I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to be doing those things, right? I can find somebody much better. Here, you have to understand that and I'm not knocking Switch, okay? Because I know some of you guys are like, yeah, exactly, right, exactly. But here's the reality: is that in the midst of all of this, when the enemy threatens you, there's nothing too difficult for God. I mean, do you really think that God is threatened or intimidated by Satan? I mean, when you look at the stories in Scripture, you're going to see this. Like going back to David, you want to bring out a giant? God says, just give me a boy and some rocks. Or you want to crucify my son? God says, just watch what I do on the third day. Or you want to silence the gospel? God says, watch what I do with the most unlikely people. Or you want to change the narrative? And God says, watch how I flip the script. Amen. Or you want to put me in check? And God says, I've had you in checkmate from the start. Like, God's not like, oh my gosh, I can't believe the enemy did that. I wasn't expecting that. He knows. God understands. He knows. And this is what God says. And our resolve as believers can rest in His promises and in His might. Right? We don't have to worry because our resolve rests in His promises and might. Let me give you this last observation. That they were courageous even as they faced the fire, right? As they faced death. So the king threatened them, but now they're facing actual death. I mean, they're facing the fire. But there wasn't any hesitancy that we see on their part as they were bound and they were sentenced to die. Right? I mean, because again, they believed who God said He is. Right? That's why they said, we don't have to talk about this. We don't have to have a meeting. We know that if God chooses, He can rescue us. He'll deliver us. Right? And here's the reality for us as believers, that if you're a follower of Christ, you've been delivered either way. Right? In life or death, God delivers us. One is deliverance for the moment. The other is deliverance for all eternity. Right? I mean, forever with Him. So we're in a no-lose situation. Quite honestly. And if we can keep thinking that or think that because of who we believe God is, it gives us a lot of peace in the days we live in. So my question for us is like, what's the furnace that you're facing right now? Like, what's the fire that you're facing right now? I mean, what if God doesn't deliver you from persecution, right? The persecution you're experiencing. Like, what if you lose your job due to your faith and your convictions? You don't get that promotion. What if you're ostracized by your family or your friends because of your biblical convictions? What if you're canceled, right? Don't even know if that's still the word today, but you know what I'm saying. What if you're canceled by culture in which you live because you're not afraid to live out your faith or give voice to your faith, right? Like, what if people stop, they unfriend you or unfollow you? They stop looking at your socials because you said something that has offended them, or they don't like what you have to say, and so they said, you know what, I'm just not going to follow you anymore. And there have been people I've seen who've changed how they relate to people on social media because they don't want to lose followers. Their identity is found in how many people are following them, who likes them, how many people are liking their posts, how many people are loving their posts. That they'll change what they say because they're fearful that if they don't bow down to their idols or they don't cave to culture, that they're going to be canceled by culture. So what if you're vilified by others because of your beliefs, right? I mean, we got homophobe, bigoted, intolerant, not compassionate, narrow-minded. I mean, we could put all the labels out there, right? And what if you're physically threatened because of your faith in Jesus? Like, do you have the courage to say, I put my faith and trust in Jesus Christ, it is well with my soul? What if God doesn't bring healing to you physically? Right? You're praying and asking God, would you just let this cancer be removed? Or maybe it does for a while and it returns. I mean, are you still going to realize that God is going to deliver you either way? What if God doesn't come through the way you would like for Him to, with your job promotion, or with that new house that you're wanting, or that new car, or your marriage, or with your children? Like, what if He doesn't? Are you still going to trust Him? What if God doesn't remove the difficult circumstance or situation from you? What if God doesn't remove the furnace from you? So here's a practical takeaway. That when we face the furnace or the fire, remember that Jesus has not abandoned you, but He's with you in the fire. We see that in the Scriptures. Like when Nebuchadnezzar looked and says, I thought we threw 3 people in there. And Nebuchadnezzar saw a fourth, and it says it's like the son, like a son of the gods, Elohim. What's going on here? I believe what we see in the Scripture is the pre-incarnate Christ. That Jesus, before He actually took on flesh that we know about in the New Testament, that He was with them. Now I know later on it talks about angel, but the appearance that we see here, we see this in other passages, even in the Old Testament, where there seems to be the pre-incarnate Christ, that literature or language that would have been used by a pagan culture would have identified it as maybe an angel, or the son of the gods, a son of the gods. And so here's what I know to be true, is that whatever you're walking through, even if you're in the midst of the furnace, that wherever Jesus is, there's peace. Like He brings peace to our chaos. Think about it. Remember when the disciples were in the boat and Jesus was sleeping? And they freaked out because they thought they were going to die. And Jesus wakes up and he's like, where's your faith? Guys, you have little faith here. And Jesus rebuked the wind and the waves and says everything became calm. The beauty of it, whether it be the storm or the furnace, that wherever Jesus is in the midst, and He's in us as believers, His Spirit dwells in us, that there's peace and there's calm, there's hope, there's strength, there's provision, there's all who Christ is and what He provides, we have access to because of Christ in us. And the enemy, I know, he's going to use these furnace moments to try to destroy your life, but God always flips the script. And He will use the furnace either to refine you, but always to radiate His glory. Always. It's either refining you, but it's always to radiate His glory. So just know that the furnace moments are not wasted. They're not. He's with you. He's not abandoned you. So just know this. So from the world's perspective, it's like you're in a no-win situation. But just remember, the Red Sea moment, when all the Israelites thought, we're between an ocean and Pharaoh's army. We're done. And God said, no, it's not over. It looked hopeless, but it wasn't. The lion's den moment that we see in chapter 6, Darius throws Daniel in the lion's den. It looks like it's over, but it wasn't. Jesus on the cross looked like it was over, but it wasn't. It's just the beginning. So the God who delivered then is the same God who delivers now. And I want to just close this last thought, this final thought. God giving courage, right? God giving courage steps into the even if moments, believing God will act for His glory, and His glory is always for our good. Right? God steps into those even if moments, even if I'm in the furnace, even if He doesn't rescue me in this moment, He still delivers me. That this courage God gives steps into those even if moments because we believe that God is doing this for His glory and even for our good. Right? And I believe that that's what Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego experienced in this. There's a lot we can take from this. And I could keep going on, but I need to stop. We're going to continue this later on. So what is the furnace you're experiencing right now? What are the things that you are giving your attention and affections to? Are there idols in your life that you need to let God shatter, right? Asking the question, God, is there an idol in my life? What are the idols in my life? And would you remove them? Would you destroy them? Right? And it's going to take you acting in obedience to Him as He shows you.